Coming up in today's newscast, an IDF officer is killed and another wounded in an overnight operation in Gaza gone wrong. Prime Minister Netanyahu cuts his Paris trip short, and Israeli singer Netta Barzilai's upcoming Euro tour gets targeted by BDS. We start today's program with some breaking news. An Israeli bus near the border of the Gaza Strip was struck by a mortar attack, and according to early reports, one Israeli has been seriously injured. Red alert sirens were issued across the south as rocket fire rained down from the Strip. The Iron Dome system, missile defense system, reportedly activated and intercepted several projectiles, although the rocket sirens have continued to blare. We will update this story as details unfold. Meanwhile, the evening rocket fire comes after an ongoing operation in the southern Gaza Strip overnight Sunday ended in tragedy, as an IDF officer was killed and another was wounded. The slain soldier has only been identified as Lieutenant Colonel M for now. However, according to the Army, quote, his heroic actions will not be published in the media, but he deserves our salute. His actions led to Israel having superiority over its enemies, end quote. He was also a father of two. The incident occurred in the Gaza town of Khan Yunis, and Israeli defense officials have stated clearly that despite reports, the operation was not intended to kidnap or assassinate. Rather, the army claims that the operation was to gather intelligence, but it went haywire halfway through when they were identified and intercepted. That's when a firefight broke out in which Lieutenant Colonel M and at least 7 Palestinians were killed. Allegedly, among the Palestinians killed in the shootout were top Hamas commanders and terrorists as well, however. Senior Hamas officials from the Izzeddin al-Qassam brigade said that a special Israeli force infiltrated Khan Yunis in a civilian car, and that once there, quote, the force assassinated the commander of our forces. The withdrawal of the enemy led to the martyrdom of a number of people, end quote. Hamas went on to charge that the alleged target of the incident, however, was Khan Yunis commander Sheikh Noor Barakeh, who supposedly led Hamas's southern terror tunnel program. As for the IDF, the civilian car wasn't the only force that entered the Strip. The military later confirmed that 3 of the 7 Palestinians who were killed in the shootout, and then IAF jets fired at least 20 projectiles at Khan Yunis, killing another 3. The 7th was wounded earlier and died of his injuries. In response, Gaza fired at least 17 missiles at Israel. There were no reports of injuries or damages, and 3 of the projectiles were intercepted by the Iron Dome. Returning now with more on the unfolding details of last night's clashes in Gaza is Dr. Mordechai Kedar, expert on the Middle East from the Begin Sadat Center at Bar-Ilan University. Dr. Kedar, welcome back. Thank you for joining us. All right, so let's just start. Hamas, first of all, we'll talk about the overnight operation. Hamas is saying that this is the end basically to any ceasefire negotiations or peace between Israel and Hamas, and that this is evidence that Israel was never serious to begin with. Do you agree?
Well, definitely, because they cannot take the fact that Israel actually attacked a target, a very specific target in that area, in Khan Yunis area, succeeded to get rid of this object which they targeted.
Well, did they target him, though? Because early IDF reports said that was just Hamas saying we targeted him, but really it was an intelligence.
There was some kind of a target which I will not elaborate on. And this target was dealt with successfully, totally and finally. However, the force which executed this action was discovered by Hamas. M was killed in the exchange of fire. And another rescue force which came took them out from the scene, and another one who is injured, not
he's in Soraka, he's stable,
and he is taken care of.
Yes.
So the bottom line of this action was definitely an Israeli success. Of course, the price was tremendous. M was killed. However, the success is too obvious. Now Hamas are retaliating. Because in the Middle East, if you don't retaliate for being targeted, you are viewed as weak, as somebody without any honor. And this is what pushes them to retaliate.
So is this recent rocket fire and the hitting of the bus, that's a show of strength just to get back to normal power structure, or is this a sign of something more to come?
No, they know that Israel will not invade Gaza in order to get rid of them. And this is what many Israeli officials have said time and again. Yes, we are going to target some targets in Gaza. We might punish some Hamas leaders. Yet we are not going into Gaza, into the tunnels and the buildings which they hide in, because we don't have an alternative to run Gaza. And this is why Hamas, although we don't like them, and apparently they don't like us, we are not going to get rid of them altogether. So Hamas is some kind of insurance policy that even if they target buses, just imagine if this bus was full of children, what would be there? They know that in any cost, Israel will not get rid of them as an organization. Maybe Israel will target a person or two persons or whoever, but not as an organization, not as a state. And they have a state. And this is why they feel immune, because Israel will never act against them in a decisive way, which will kick them all out.
All right, well, we'll have to wait and see how this latest attack unfolds. As I've said earlier,
Well,
details
I
are
have
still
a
coming out.
good feeling that it is on, as it is now, Monday evening here in Israel, that it is on the escalation direction. To what extent it will escalate, I have no idea. How long will it take, I have no idea. Yet, these hours are hours of escalation.
All right, Dr. Kedal, thank you for joining us.
Pleasure.
As of now, it's been a century since the end of World War I, and Prime Minister Netanyahu gathered in Paris along with over 70 other world leaders to mark the centennial. His visit was cut short, however, due to intense clashes that broke out between Israeli forces and Palestinian fighters in the Gaza Strip last night. But before departing, Netanyahu commented that hundreds of thousands of Jewish fighters were involved in World War I, and that the war marked a turning point for Jews to defend themselves, paving the way for Zionism to flourish. Netanyahu also attended a ceremony at the Arc de Triomphe, as well as a luncheon with international leaders. And although France discouraged side talks during the event, Netanyahu managed to have a, quote, good and businesslike conversation with Russian President Putin. This was the first meeting between the two since the downing of a Russian spy plane in Syria during a September Israeli air raid. Reports up until the meeting were that Putin had canceled it in an apparent snub over Netanyahu, but thankfully that talk has just been put to rest. Netanyahu was also seen with United States President Donald Trump and German Chancellor Angela Merkel, and he added that many African leaders also came up to him about the importance of the cooperation with Israel and ways Israel could help their countries. Meanwhile, France is now holding a 3-day international peace forum that will end on Tuesday and aims to highlight the importance of the global community at a time when people are questioning the necessity of international institutions. But while the international peace forum was going on, southern Israel was far from peaceful. After the clashes broke out between Israeli commandos and Hamas fighters in Gaza Sunday night, Netanyahu cut his trip short and headed back to Israel. Until Prime Minister Netanyahu was scheduled to arrive, Defense Minister Lieberman was left in charge of convening the security cabinet of top ministers. There are no statements from the meeting just yet. While leaders are gathered now in Paris to commemorate the end of World War I, last week Friday, German Chancellor Angela Merkel commemorated the anniversary of the 1938 Kristallnacht pogroms of World War II. Speaking to Jewish leaders at a Berlin synagogue, Merkel said that, quote, Jewish life is blossoming again in Germany, an unexpected gift to us after the Shoah. But we are also witnessing a worrying anti-Semitism that threatens Jewish life in our country, end quote. Merkel went on to call for a zero-tolerance policy towards anti-Semitic and violent hate groups.
Leider haben wir uns beinahe schon daran gewöhnt, dass jede jüdische Einrichtung von der Polizei bewacht oder besonders geschützt werden muss. Synagoge, Schule, Kindergarten, Restaurant, Friedhof. Aber wir erschrecken uns über Angriffe auf Menschen, die eine Kippa tragen, und stehen fassungslos vor dem rechtsradikal motivierten Angriff auf ein jüdisches Restaurant im August dieses Jahres in Chemnitz. Das ist eine Form antisemitischer Straftaten, die schlimme Erinnerungen an den Beginn der Judenverfolgung in den 30er Jahren wachruft. Aber solche Vorfälle müssen nicht nur die Überlebenden der Shoah alarmieren. Sie sind furchtbar für uns alle. Lassen Sie uns alle jeden Tag mit dem Verständnis von heute daran arbeiten, dass so etwas wie vor 80 Jahren nie wieder passiert. Das ist die Botschaft und die Essenz unseres heutigen Gedenkens. Herzlichen Dank.
But while her rhetoric is well and good, critics have pointed to the severe lack in enforcement of such ideals. Not only have anti-Semitic incidents been surging across Europe unhindered, a new book by British Holocaust historian Mary Fulbrook details how little Germany actually did to hold Nazis and neo-Nazis responsible for their crimes. In Reckonings, Legacies of Nazi Persecution and the Quest for Justice, Fulbrook writes that while 1 million people were believed to have been active participants in the Holocaust genocide, only roughly 20,000, or 2%, have ever been found guilty, and only 600 of them were ever given sentences over 2 to 3 years. Further, only 164 individuals were ever sentenced for charges of murder. Fulbrook illustrates that, quote, the total number of persons convicted under the Federal Republic for Nazi crimes was in itself fewer even than the number of people who had been employed at Auschwitz alone, end quote. She said that and how only 567 of the convicted Nazi criminals were ever sentenced to death or life in prison. Fulbrook concludes also that the only following orders argument had been accepted so often that, quote, in effect, if not in intention, West German law condoned obedience to a deadly regime and condemned only those who had individually stepped beyond Nazism's already murderous limits.
Regardless of politics or personal feelings, the IDF Judea and Samaria medical unit saves lives every single day. Israeli or Palestinian, they don't care, and they're on call 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. And although it may be hard, IDF Lieutenant Colonel Dr. Ido Dachman says it's very, quote, fulfilling. Dachman is based at the headquarters of the IDF's Judea and Samaria division, where he oversees 100 personnel, and the team is responsible for all emergency medical services in the 3,000 square kilometer region. The IDF crew responds to an average of 3 calls per day, coordinating with the Israeli Magen David Adom and Palestinian Red Crescent health services. And they get called to all manner of crises, from a Jewish woman in labor with complications to a Palestinian Muslim cancer patient requiring transport to an Israeli facility for treatment. The number one casualty, though, is car accidents. Dachman mentioned that there are a few spikes in the accident incidents every year, quote, especially during Ramadan, the Islamic holy month when Muslims fast from sunrise to sundown. Dachman explained that, quote, this is because the observant do not eat or drive during the day, but at night they start their lives and some drive very recklessly, I'm sorry to say, end quote. But he also said that when there is an accident, no one asks questions or points blame. Rather, they're there to ensure that the wounded receive the best possible care, no matter who it is. This year, some 2,000 people, about half of them Palestinian, have been treated by the Israel's Army West Bank unit. On a related note, following a series of fatal car crashes on the same Jerusalem highway, Transportation Minister Israel Katz has finally ordered plans to be drawn up to expand the controversial Route 90.
In the last 3 weeks alone, 17 people have been killed on Route 90. 2 weeks ago, 8 members of a single family were killed in a head-on collision on the road near the Dead Sea. Then on Sunday, 6 Palestinians from East Jerusalem died in a similar crash in the Jordan Valley. And then on Friday, the road was closed due to heavy flooding, where police issued a statement that part of Route 90 may be at risk of collapse due to flash flooding. They told drivers to exercise extreme caution when driving in the area. Last week, Katz said that budget constraints, traffic considerations, and safety issues prevented any major renovation work on the road. But he changed his position on the matter this week, saying that the project, quote, stems from a strategic national vision, end quote. Route 90 is the longest route in Israel, and it goes from the north in Metula all the way down south to Eilat. Most of the road is decades old and as of now is only 1 lane wide in each direction with no divider. So as part of the plan, Transportation Minister Katz said in a statement that the road will be expanded to 2 lanes in each direction, with an option to add a third on some sections of the 480-kilometer route. No divider will likely be placed just yet, however, and no details were given on the cost or time frame for this project either.
It has just been announced that former Mossad chief Ephraim Halevi will be joining Israeli private intelligence firm Black Cube, and ILTV's correspondent Doriel Mizrahi joins us with the details.
Thanks, Aaron. So for those who don't exactly know what Black Cube is, according to their website, it's a select group of veterans from the Israeli elite intelligence units that specialize in tailored solutions to complex businesses and litigation challenges. But Black Cube has literally become one of the world's most famous private intelligence and investigation companies, and Ephraim Halevi is a significant recruitment for the company. He'll sit on the board of directors and will head their client screening committee, and he'll also serve as a senior advisor on operational and intelligence issues.
Wow. Now, I understand that Black Cube has also been linked to some problematic customers and international scandals too, though. Has that affected Halevi's choice to join up?
Well, clearly not. But yeah, the company actually helped Hollywood producer Harvey Weinstein gather information about his victims of alleged sex crimes, as well as journalists who had information about him. There were 2 Black Cube members that were arrested in Romania on suspicion of illegal wiretapping. And the company is also facing allegations of impersonation in Canada. Wow. So there's also members who are even being accused of gathering information about former senior officials in the Obama administration.
That is incredulous.
Yeah, for sure. But retroactively, the company did regret accepting Weinstein as a client. The company actually categorizes its clients according to a 3-color system: green for non-problematic clients, red for clients who they refuse to work with, and yellow for questionable clients. And now those clients categorized as questionable are going to be reviewed again by the committee that Ephraim Halevi will actually be in charge of. They'll decide whether the Black Cube accepts or rejects those clients. It's also important to note, though, that the Black Cube is refusing to comment on any details of Halevi's hiring.
All right, well, I hope they make some better decisions then in the future with respect to whom they work for, and perhaps Halevi is exactly who they need for that.
For sure.
At any rate, thank you, Dorian.
Thank you for having me.
Speaking of cybersecurity, 5,000 people, 175 different companies, and visitors from over 80 different countries are today set to attend the 5th Biennial International Homeland Security and Cyber Conference in Tel Aviv. The chairman of the Israel Export Institute and the Cyber Conference, Adiv Baruch, told the Jerusalem Post that Israel, quote, has become one of the leading hubs in homeland security and cybersecurity in the last few years, and that the conference, quote, brings the decision makers to Israel rather than Israeli companies chasing the market and committing to additional expenditures, end quote. At the conference, hundreds of product designers, company leaders, and potential investors and partners will convene to review and present Israeli know-how and tech. At least 100 different speakers between the Homeland Security and Cyber conferences are also scheduled to address the participants, including Shin Bet Director Nadav Argaman, Director General of the Israel National Cyber Directorate, Yigal Una, Public Security Minister Gilad Erdan, and Police General Commissioner Roni Alshech. And among the top sponsors for the event are Israeli security agencies Elbit Systems, Rafael Advanced Defense Systems, and the Mer Group manufacturing company. Decades ago, one of modern Israel's founding fathers, David Ben-Gurion, challenged the nation of Israel to develop all of the nation, not just the center, but the periphery too. Well, today, while the Negev, Golan, and Galilee regions make up a whopping 80% of the country, they only contribute to less than 10% of the economy. Well, the Ayalim movement aims to change that, and today we have the chairman of the Ayalim movement, Jacob Dayan, here to tell us all about it. Jacob, thank you so much for coming in.
Shalom, thank you for having me.
It's my pleasure. So tell us a little bit about the Ayalim movement and what you've accomplished so far.
Okay, I can tell you that I learned to know about Ayalim as a diplomat representing the state of Israel, and all of a sudden I saw the beautiful face of Israel, young pioneers building the periphery, the social and geographical periphery, 22 villages building by their own hands and volunteering everywhere. This was really the beautiful face of Israel, and I realized that this project is not only strategically important for the state of Israel, but it's also important to connect, to bond the young Jewish or Jews in the United States and the Israelis, the young Israelis. Those are peers speaking the same language, and when I was representing the state of Israel, I saw the growing gap between the young Jewry in the United States and the one in Israel. So I understood immediately that that can serve as a beautiful, excellent tool to connect the young pioneers in Israel and those in the United States.
So does Ayalim go out of its way to target diaspora Jewry as, the other half of this puzzle, or is that just kind of part of the global message in general to all Jews?
It's part of the global message. First and foremost, strategically, it is important for the state of Israel. As you said correctly, they are building the periphery in Israel, the social and the geographical periphery. When I'm saying geographical, it's 21 villages in the Negev, 60% of the state of Israel, and barely populated. So it's important for the state of Israel because otherwise we will lose the Negev. And also one in Lod, which is the social periphery. So strategically, they are important, vital for the state of Israel. By the way, 45% of them are staying and leaving afterwards. After they graduate, they stay and live in the periphery, go back and leave. So strategically, this project is extremely important for the state of Israel. But I'm saying as a byproduct, this is also an excellent tool or instrument to connect the young Jewry in the United States and the Israelis, because both know not very much about each other, and the gap is growing. That's why I saw that as an opportunity to connect them, and now we are trying also to bring young American Jews to work, to live in those villages, to see this inspiring group and to be part of it.
So, okay, final question, where can people sign up? Because it sounds like a lot of people are about to.
First, the website of Ayalim is great and very interactive, and they can sign. We have more than 1,200 students every year, Israeli students every year, going through Ayalim. We have thousands that graduated Ayalim. As I said, 45% are staying in the periphery. And now we are trying to approach the Jewish communities all around the United States, because there are only two communities today, Jewish communities around the world. One in Eretz Israel, most of the Jews live, and the other one is in the United States. So whatever we are not going to do for each other is not going to happen. So I invite everyone to come and visit one of the villages of Ayalim, because eventually seeing is believing.
Beautiful. Jacob, thank you so much for coming in.
Thank you for having me.
It's amazing. Go and support it.
Thank you
so much.
Thank you.
All right, just 5 days following the Pittsburgh Tree of Life Synagogue massacre, the 12th annual Other Israel Film Festival opened its doors in New York for a week full of thought-provoking and conflict-ridden Israeli films. But while some criticize the timing as insensitive, the mission statement of the conference is simply to hold a conversation with the other leading organizers for the event, saying that the timing was more poignant than ever. Films at the conference that ended last week included narrative pieces and documentaries, as well as 2 one-hour-long compilations of short films, and the topics spanned everything from Palestinian security prisoners in Israel's Megiddo prison to mistaken identities, internal struggles, and of course both anti-Israel and anti-Palestinian discrimination. Among the films people resonated with most, however, is The Cousin, a 93-minute dramatic comedy involving tested loyalties when an Israeli man hires a Palestinian handyman to fix his house, who's then accused by the neighbors of assaulting a young woman. Then another film making major waves again now in New York is the 70-minute documentary Unsettling by award-winning filmmaker Iris Zaki. In it, Zaki, a supposed liberal local from Tel Aviv, travels to the controversial Israeli West Bank settlement of Tekoa, where she stays for a month in an attempt to understand the locals. Speaking of the film, Zaki said her films are about Iris talking to people. It's all about making the interaction as close as it could be if there wasn't a camera, and making people who don't know me talk right away, open up, and forget about the filmmaking process. The result is an incredibly in-depth and surprising look at the individuals who live in one of the most hotly contested areas on Earth. Thankfully, though, nearly all the attendees at the screenings left with the same message, that only through conversation and the breaking down of barriers between us can we ever hope to end conflict. Israeli Eurovision Song Contest winner Netta Barzilai has an upcoming European tour with scheduled performances in Austria, Switzerland, Germany, France, and the United Kingdom. But already organizations supporting the BDS movement have launched a campaign calling for a boycott of her shows.
Wonder Woman, don't you ever forget, you're divine and he's about to regret.
Barzilai's song Toy won Israel the right to host next year's European singing competition in Tel Aviv. That in itself was the cause of much debate, with 140 artists urging a boycott of Eurovision as well if hosted in the Jewish state. Well, now the BDS movement is at it again, dubbing Netta, quote, the apartheid state ambassador, end quote. BDS groups usually only target Israeli state institutions, but explain that Barzilai is part of Israel's PR efforts, which makes her a legitimate target for boycott. Boycotters said, quote, cultural ambassadors are not common people. They are the official representatives of the occupation and the apartheid regime, end quote. And among the groups calling for the boycott are BDS organizations in Switzerland, Germany, and Britain, 3 countries included in Netta's scheduled tour. Netta isn't the only cultural ambassador, however. Boycott efforts against Israeli artists have increased continuously in recent years, targeting performers Idan Reichel, Asaf Avidan, and even the Batsheva Dance Company. The BDS protests and demonstrations against their shows abroad included using social media campaigns and demonstrations on the night of the show. And now for our Hebrew word of the day. There's an IDF army unit of doctors in the West Bank that helps all patients no matter what. So our word of the day is rofeh or rofa, which translates to doctor. Now, doctors, or rofim, are qualified practitioners of medicine, and they can treat patients medically. Rofim range in their fields of expertise too. There are pediatricians, whom are children doctors, and then there are also doctors or rofim that specialize in the brain, called neurologists. It's not an easy road to follow, though, and the closest I ever came to being a doctor or rofeh was watching the show House. So make sure you thank your rofeh or rofa for all the hard work that they do next time you meet. Now let's go ahead and take a look at the weather forecast. Tonight should be partly cloudy and fairly cold, with lows of about 48 or 14 degrees Celsius. Then tomorrow the weather is by and large expected not to change, with a high of around 75 or 24 degrees Celsius. All right, that's it for today's news. Today's exchange rate is 3.68 shekels to the American dollar. Remember to sign up for our daily newsletter at iltv.tv, and don't forget to follow us on Facebook at Israel English News and on Twitter at ILTV News. I'm Aaron Porras. Thank you for watching.